Anime is many things. It is thrilling, funny, romantic, epic, cute, sexy. But it isn't sublime. First of all, what is the sublime? Like most abstract ideas, definitions vary between people. But one general agreement is the presence of fear, most notably from something powerful and destructive. But I disagree with this sentiment of fear, as is described in another word perfectly already, which is awe, and is defined as a feeling of reverential respect mixed with fear or wonder. And after reading through various authors' definition, the one I found to closely match my experience is from Max Dessoir, who defined it as an experience that involves a self-forgetfulness, where personal fear is replaced by a sense of well-being and security when confronted with an object exhibiting superior might. Still, I do not believe it to be a very accurate description, so here is how I would define it. The sublime is the subversion of the tragedy of death. To understand this statement, let's first explore the nature of tragedy and death. So what is tragedy? To use a quote from Max Dessoir, genuine tragedy leaves a conflict unresolved. Thus, what can be more permanent than death? Because what may often be considered a tragedy is simply momentary great sorrow. For example, when someone falls gravely ill, there is always a chance of recovery. And such momentary great sorrows may also be blessings in disguise. For example, if a worker were to lose their arm in a factory accident, it may be seen as tragic by some. But if war were to break out soon after, and the worker is spared conscription, then it will be seen as a blessing in disguise. Thus, a tragedy cannot be known until the end is reached. The transition from sorrow to tragedy is not gradual, but sudden, like water to ice. However, it is not death itself that invokes tragedy, but the attitude towards it, of which there are three, namely apathetic, cathartic, and tragic, with varying degrees in the latter two. An apathetic death results from emotional detachment. This occurs when your relationship with the subject is too distant, such as the death of your great-great-grandfather, whom you've never met, or the news of the people who died in a natural disaster. A cathartic death results from a negative emotional attachment with the subject. It can be thought of as a deserved death, such as hearing that your bully died, or when the villain in a story is killed off. The death of the subject invokes a feeling of relief. A tragic death results from a positive emotional attachment with the subject, such as when a family pet gets run over, or a main character in the story dies. The conflict here stems from the observer's desire for the continuity of the subject against the cessation, hence the tragedy. The next topic is why the sublime is sought after. And there is something from Max Dessoir that stood out for me. He writes, "Is there anything more terrible than the fantastic idea of the human mind enclosed in an animal body? And yet we are all in a similar situation. We feel our weakness, and fate never allows us to overstep the boundary." This quite reflects the idea of the unbound mind being encased by a bounded body, and the fear of mortality that emerges because of this contrast. For every one of us must confront our mortality eventually. And if death is guaranteed from the moment of our conception, then what is the purpose of the journey? What is the meaning of life? And it is the pursuit of the sublime that will assuage this anxiety. So then, what, or rather who, can help us with this pursuit? And it is only through people, ourselves or otherwise, as neither nature nor the notion of the divine will give us answers. For nature acts with no deeper meaning, while the truly divine is either incomprehensible, or, like nature, is simply acting in accordance to its essence. But the essence of man is neither solely nature nor solely divine. We are both, having a mind of divinity and a body of nature. For we may understand without knowing, and know without understanding. For example, we understood heat through the experience of pain and comfort, before knowing the mechanics of it. Similarly, we know about the spectrum of light, but only understand the small section that we experience as colors. Thus, knowledge is objective, hence depersonalized, while understanding is subjective, hence personalized. And we experience most of the world through subjective means, the prime example being language, which is no more than contrasted lines arranged into certain shapes, or vibrations in specific orders, all of which somehow imparts meaning. Thus, if we are satisfied with the delusion of language, the delusion of understanding each other, we must take with equal treatment towards finding our purpose, and that is simply the solace of deluding ourselves of one. But the delusion of purpose must meet two criteria, or it will be subject to fragility. For the fear that comes with having a purpose is also the loss of it. Where purpose is achieved, so too does it meet its end. And where purpose lacks successes, so too will its meaning wane. Thus the purpose one finds must be so grand that it will not be achieved in one's lifetime, and must be performed with the intention of passing it on. Only then can it be secure. This is why in stories, when the purpose of the main character ends, then so must the story conclude, or its characters replaced. Otherwise there is no longer any story but a pointless assembly of words. Thus the quote, "You either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain," has such a deep meaning, because it shows both strength in character and righteousness of purpose, and it can be rephrased as, "You either die by your morals or live long enough to betray them." Next is how the feeling of the sublime is invoked, which is through the transcendence of the individual. To best envision it, it is like a single brick in the cathedral, or a drop of paint in an artwork. The cathedral is made up of many individual bricks, yet it would not be considered simply as a collection of bricks, but an entity in and of itself. Similarly, the artwork is not just a collection of colors, but holds a distinct form. Thus, the subversion of the tragedy of death happens when the individual death is diminished by the greatness of the life it is subsumed by. As Max Tessoir puts it, one may pity the hero of the tragedy because he is called away prematurely, but the hero and the author do not intend to invoke any pity at all. They find it as natural as it is ennobling that the burning candle consumes itself. Ultimately, however, this perception of transcendence is dependent on the observer, for if you hold no reverence towards a cathedral or admiration towards an artwork, then it will be viewed as pointless and a waste of effort. Now that the definition of the sublime has been established, my reason for why anime fails to invoke the sublime is because they don't subvert tragedy. As evidence, I will use 3 examples. The first will be Rengoku's death in Demon Slayer. The reaction to his death is portrayed as tragic, both during and after the fact. And although he himself accepts his death with grace, in the end it is a death that is not subsumed by anything, which ultimately leaves it painfully hollow. The second example will be Kamina from Gurren Lagann. Like Rengoku, he accepts his death, but with a mix of grace and coolness. And similar to Rengoku, the reception to his death is one of tragedy. And while his death does drive Simon's growth, there is a huge gap between Simon's development and Kamina's death, which prevents any possibility for the sublime to occur. The third example is Erwin's death from Attack on Titan. Erwin's death is an interesting one, because it could almost be sublime, but actually invokes a different feeling. Erwin not only accepts his death, but recognizes the inherent tragedy behind it. And that's where the difference lies. His death is actually tragic, however his actions are a rebellion of that tragedy, which makes it heroic. To simplify, heroism is the rebellion of tragedy, while the sublime is the subversion of it. Overall, these were the main examples I can remember, so if you want to challenge this idea with an example, feel free to leave a comment. Now let's look at how Warhammer 40k invokes the sublime, and for this I will use 2 examples. The first will be the Dawn of War 3 trailer. In the beginning there is a quote, "There is a terrible darkness descending upon the galaxy, and we shall not see it ended in our lifetimes." This is foreshadowing the inevitable grim life of a space marine, and yet the space marines do not see it this way. For this misery is allayed by the brotherhood they experience, and the knowledge that their death will bring honor to the chapter by fully serving the Emperor who keeps the Imperium functioning through warp travel. Their death is subsumed by the vastness of the Imperium. And this is a similar case with the death core of Krieg, but with their individual lives being even less free and impactful, and yet their death is still sublime, as it is subsumed by the atonement for the crimes of their ancestors. Each life is like a coin being tossed into a bottomless pit that creates a shower of glimmering light. Overall, I hope you got an understanding of what the sublime means to me, and how it applies to anime and Warhammer 40k.